Today I'm going to be showing you how to make a dog jumper using knitting if you have never knitted before in your life. Several times I've tried to look up tutorials and stuff on how to knit a dog jumper, but I've never been able to find one that was simple enough for me because I only know the absolute basics of knitting and I don't know how to do different types of stitches or how to use round needles or anything along those lines, so this is the absolute basics. You're obviously going to need 2 straight needles and wool for this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do it the way that worked for me, and then you just change it so it suits yourself. So for example, the first thing I did was I knitted a square using these needles and this wool, and I found that 15 stitches across is the width that I needed for Tia's chest. So that's what I'm going to be doing. That will obviously change for you depending on the size of your dog, how thick your wool is, and the size of your needles. To make your first stitch, what you're going to do is put the short end over the front, reach through from behind and then grab the long end and then pull that through to make a loop. This, if it's done properly, if you pull both ends, it should just disappear. It's like a magic knot. So again, it's just making a loop by putting the short end over the front and then from behind pulling through it and then taking the long end on the right hand side and making a loop. You're then going to put this over your needle and this is going to act as your first stitch. Pull the long end to shorten the stitch so it's just the size of the needle, and then you can just loosen it a little bit so you can fit your second needle in, because obviously you're going to need to put both needles in the one stitch to add in more stitches and then to start knitting. If you want, you can cut off the short end there because that's of no use to you. You can get rid of that shortly, but it's just if it's going to be in your way, feel free to cut it off. I'm going to be making 15 stitches because I know that's how wide Tia's chest is, and this is going to be a chest piece. So you put both needles into the one stitch, put the string around the second needle, and you're going to drag it down with the point still touching the other needle and pull to make another stitch, and you pop that on top. This can be a little bit tricky at first, so just watch closely. You put the second needle up in through the top stitch. You take the wool that is connected to your ball of wool and you put that in between the 2 needles, and then you put your finger on top of the needle so that it doesn't slip, and you drag that down along the left needle to create a stitch with the wool, and then drag that over the top, and then you take out your needle so that you've got now another new stitch. If you've never done it before, it can take a little bit of practice, so you can feel free to just keep rewinding back and forth here. You can mute me because it's probably very annoying hearing me say the same thing over and over again, but it's not difficult once you've gotten into the knack of it. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be making 15 stitches, and then when those 15 stitches are done, then I can start knitting. Make sure when you're knitting that you're not pulling the stitches super tight. You'll see that when I put it through, I then just kind of let go of the wool and let it be slack because I don't want it to be super tight. You will not get your needle in through it, and also the wool is more likely to break and stretch and it'll be very uneven. So again, practice. If this doesn't work, you can take the whole lot off, pull either ends of the wool and it'll pop off and disappear like it did at the start with that magic stitch or magic knot, and that's you ready to start brand new all over again. There's no waste of wool. You can just keep restarting as many times as you need to, and then when you get into the hang of it, you can just keep practicing over and over and you'll be able to do it in no time. Again, for anyone who's starting from absolute scratch, I have technically been knitting for like 5 years, but I find it very difficult to follow instructions online, especially written ones, and because of that it took me 5 days to do this because I am very slow at knitting. So I just did like a couple hours here, a couple hours there. I watched The Walking Dead. It was great, but it took me quite a while. So it's something that you can just pick up in your spare time for an hour here and there, and it's just kind of something to do, something relaxing, and you get a little dog jumper at the end, so it's great. How I decided on 15 stitches for Tia was because I knitted a square that was 10 stitches across just so I could put it up against her body to decide on measurements, and I decided it was a little bit too small, so 15 stitches should be the correct amount, and then from the 15 stitches I'll be able to judge how big the back piece should be. Once your stitches are in place, you can then start knitting. So knitting is done the exact same way, but instead of pulling down and making a new stitch, you just take the entire stitch off the top and transfer it from the left needle to the right needle. Also, I have a habit of resting my right needle against myself so that I don't have to hold it, so it's a little bit easier. So up through the stitch, around the right hand side needle, down again, but instead of pulling down to make a new needle, you just slide the entire thing off the top. That way it's on the right hand side one again. So up, around, down, and then off the top. So you should, at the end, when you've knitted this entire row, you should, if you count your stitches on your right hand side needle, you should still have the 15 or whatever number of stitches you've decided to do. Then you can swap your needle so that the one with the stitches that is now on your right goes onto your left, and you just do it again. So you just do this back and forth and back and forth. If you're left-handed, you do it the opposite way around, obviously, but since I am not, I cannot demonstrate that. I am sorry. Again, make sure not to pull your wool too tight, because otherwise you won't be able to fit both needles into the one stitch, but just make sure to have it sort of pulled taut enough that it's not a stitch that's just sort of flopping off the side, because then they'll get mixed up and they'll get tangled and it's a hell of a mess. Once you've knitted all of them, you should have a little row on the side, and that is the actual thickness of how wide that piece is going to be, because the stitches at the very start are not going to be the correct width. So when I hold this up to Tia, you can see that's roughly the width of her chest, and so that's going to be the perfect amount for the piece that I'm going to have going down the middle. If I really wanted, I could have made it a little bit wider, but I didn't want it to be rubbing against her legs when she was trying to lie down and relax. After you've knitted many rows, you'll end up with a piece of material roughly like this. So my colours are only like this because I'm using a multicoloured wool. I didn't put in different types and stripes, but what I did was I just knitted a really long piece and it just happened to turn into stripes, which was cool. So I'm wanting this to go from a little bit below the collar, covering the front of her chest, and then down below her chest to roughly this far down her body. I don't want to go any further than that because when she's lying down curled up on the couch or whatever, her back legs are going to go forward, and I don't want her rolling it back up or stretching it unnecessarily, and I want her to be comfortable, because this is mainly going to be a jumper that she's wearing during, say, the winter when it's really cold or stuff like that, not something she's going to be wearing outside. When I'm happy with the length of it, I can then cast off. So casting off is very similar to the knitting. What you do is you knit the first stitch and you knit the second stitch, and then you have to pull one of the stitches over the other. So first stitch, you knit it like you do completely normally. Second stitch, again, knit it completely normally, up, around, down and through. But then what you do is you take the bottom stitch, you put it over the top stitch, and you pop it right off the top. So over top stitch, I'm using my other hand to pull down the top one, and then the bottom one's going off the top. I'm sorry, a car got excited. So once you have that stitch pulled over the top, you then knit the next one, and you do the exact same thing. So you take the bottom stitch that you have there, you put it over the top one, you can use your other hand to hold down the top one so you don't mix them up by accident, and then you just pop it straight off the top. I shot it again with flash because I didn't think it was very clear. So you have the one stitch on the right, you're going to knit one more, and then when you've got two stitches on the right, you take the bottom one, put it over the top one, you can use your left hand to pull down the top one a bit so it doesn't get mixed up, and pop it off over the top. And you do this over and over and over again until you've got no more stitches to cast off. This could be a little bit tricky if you don't have long nails, but I do, so I'm able to just pick the stitches apart from each other and get them over the top fairly easily. I'm not quite sure how people with short nails do this, but I'm sure you adapt. I'm sure you know how. I just can't picture how. It takes a little bit of patience, but altogether it took me less than 2 minutes to cast off the 15 stitches, and I'm not very good at it, so it's not something that takes a ton of time. It's just making sure that you do it correctly, and then when you're done, you've got a lovely neat row at the end that you're able to like, yay, look, my piece is done, yay. There's always something super satisfying about when you're able to cast off a piece of knitting that's been taking you a while to do, especially if it took you a while to do. When you're down to your last two stitches, you dump the other needle and you put one over the other just like you were doing with the others, but then what you do with the last stitch is you're going to actually just stretch it out so it's big, cut the end and put that through. And then you're done. That's your chest piece completely knitted and completed, and hopefully it should look something along the lines of this, where it's just a rectangular shaped piece. Pull the string tight so that it will seal itself, and then you can just snip off the end, and that's you done the chest piece. When this is done, you then just need to do the back piece. So the back piece, for me, what I did was I said the chest piece was 15 stitches across, and I held it up to Tia and I decided that it was going to be 15 for the back and 15 for each side. So I said altogether 45 stitches across, and I was going to just knit until it was the entire length of the body as far as the chest piece goes. So after I did that, and it took me a little bit of a while, it ended up looking like this. So this piece took a lot longer than the chest piece. This was definitely a completely separate day. I put it up as far as just the base of her neck where her collar usually is, and then the chest piece goes in the front and goes along the side and underneath the belly, and it matches up to the back of the back piece. Make sure you don't make it the same length as the back piece, because you're wanting it to go up at the chest at the front so that it's not going to just be a big tube that they can just walk out of. The front piece is going to connect to the back piece along these lines, so I've decided I'm going to have it roughly as far as that pink line there, and that's exactly how I'm going to knit it. I'm going to be sewing it together using the wool that I actually used to knit it, so it looks a little bit nicer, so it's not just some random bright coloured thread or string. I'm going to use the exact same wool that I used before, and it should all match up perfectly fine. So when attaching the chest piece to the back piece, make sure to do it in roughly this style. So make sure that the left side of the belly matches up with the left side of the body, and the front of the chest has to be against or at a right angle of the back of the neck. When you've got that laid out, then you can just put the wool through a large-eyed needle. Now, it should be a bigger needle than this, but I had to make do with what I had, and the camera wouldn't focus either. But it's a needle that the hole in, or the eye in the needle was roughly the size of the wool, so that was fine. It wasn't going to damage the wool in any way. It's just it would have been nicer if it had a bigger eye on it. In case you don't have one of those little loopy things that goes through the needle to help you thread it, which I do not remember the name of, take a normal piece of thread, bend it in half, and then the side that's kind of a loop in itself, you're going to put that through the eye of the needle, and then you're going to spread open that loop when it's through and put the wool through it instead. So thread through, and you're going to open up the loopy bit, and then you're going to put the wool straight through that loop. And what you can do then is you carefully pull that thread back through the needle, wiggling kind of up and down slightly while you go, so you don't damage the wool too much. And then the wool is now through the needle without being super frayed or damaged in any way, and voila, you can now start knitting together your pieces of knitting. When that's done, you're going to do the exact same thing on the opposite side. So you're going to take the opposite side of the chest piece and the opposite side of the back piece, and you're going to bend it in such a way and then sew it together just like that. And that's going to be the neck hole there that her little head is going to stick through. And when that's done, it should look something like this. So we have the chest piece knitted together completely fine, but now we just need to do the belly part. So what we're going to do is we're going to start from the back to make sure that it lines up perfectly. So it's on Tia now. We're made sure the neck piece fits properly. It's not choking her. It's not falling straight off her. We're going to take the very back corner, and we're going to start knitting by matching it up to the back corner as well. But just judging how much leg room to give her, I've decided that there's a pink stripe there that I'm going to do halfway up that pink stripe. So you start from the back and sew forwards. And when that's done, it should fit perfectly like this. And then you're done. So this is her little dog jumper. It'll be sturdy enough that when she's going around the house and it's cold in the winter, she shouldn't be too cold. There's enough room there around her neck for her not to be strangled. It's soft and it's not constricting on her in any way. And then when she moves her legs around, there's plenty of room behind her legs that it's not cutting into her. It's not really awkwardly up in her armpits or anything like that, because it's not something that needs to stay on long term. It's just for when there's a winter's day or something like that, that it's very cold and she's shivering and needs just an extra little bit of warmth. So that's it for this video. Thank you very much for watching. I'm hoping that it was of help to someone, and if you make little dog jumpers, let me know, because I want to know if it was helpful to anyone. Thank you very much for watching.